There's this thing that we do as human beings that I'm going to title the Nihilistic Faith Impulse. And you'll kind of understand what I'm talking about as this goes forward. But whatever we believe in, if we believe in a higher power or we don't, if we believe in the constructor or the creator of this universe as being the problem source of what's wrong in our lives, or the pain that we're feeling. We, within ourselves and within our ideas and with how we talk to this thing, whatever it is, we often, are frustrated about what's happening in our lives, or how the world is, or why we keep suffering in the same way again and again and again. And we want to take it out on that either higher power or higher ideal within ourselves, because it's not always spiritual. It's not always source or God or something like that. And when it is source and God, and sometimes your entire spirituality is formed on this nihilistic faith impulse, where it's you want to combat the thing that made this terrible system, this terrible creation that we find ourselves in, or whether you view it as a creation or whether you view it as material that came about somehow. We want to, when things aren't going right, or we see the terrible things that are happening around us and the state of the world, we are frustrated with that thing that we viewed as creating it, or the processes that brought it into being. If it's a spiritual nature, if it's a philosophical thing, then it's just kind of nihilism, where you're like, nothing really matters. But if you feel, if there's a higher ideal that you believe in within yourself that you're frustrated at, that you haven't completely divorced from, or if you believe that there is some part of yourself or some external entity that is causing these things, supernatural or philosophical internally, externally, supernatural internally, externally, whether it be soul within, soul without. Sometimes it's that. But the nihilistic faith impulse, in my description of this, because I honestly don't know if this is a term, I just kind of am using it for the sake of this video, but we are like, you'll get this feeling, sometimes we all kind of get it as human beings. Well, fine, why do I keep on going through this? Why have I gone through it again and again and again? What do you want? And sometimes, a lot of people believe in the supernatural will look up. People who are more philosophical will be like, why does this keep happening? Will often look down and kind of like go into a state of hyperthought, or just thinking more and more like, why does this keep happening? You try to focus on finding a solution that is combating, if it's just philosophical, a solution or a frustration that is combating a higher ideal within yourself of how you think the world works, or how you think it should work, or your previously conceived notions that don't seem to correlate with the experiences you're having, or the experiences that you see in the world that has caused you frustration. If it's a higher power, you might be like, God, why do you keep doing this to me? Why do I keep on going through this? Or, and if, especially if your spirituality is very adversarial, and you think that the creator, say the demiurge that has created this universe, the multiverse, or the personhood of God, the Godhead, you might, if you're adversarial, you might be like, you know what, I'm gonna go to your adversary. You have created the system that is awful. Why do I keep on going through these situations where I keep trying and trying and I keep failing and failing? And you're the one who created the system. Why did you do this? Why have you caused the capacity for me and everyone here to suffer, that no matter how hard we try, we keep suffering? And all of these innocents keep on suffering, and we tend to turn to, innocent suffering when we are in this situation, whether it be philosophical or spiritual, whether it be adversarial or you're just Christian. But we tend to think about all the people who have suffered in this world, who are suffering. When we're suffering, and we realize that there's a whole lot of other people that are suffering for even fewer reasons, or even less reasons, or even they're more innocent than us, we tend to turn to that and just question why. And we tend to, if it's spiritual, we look up, why, God, why are you doing this? Or Creator, this is why I'm for the adversary. Or internally, once again, trying to figure out, like, why does this keep happening? The direction of sight is not a huge factor, a big factor in this, especially when it comes to tendencies for how these conversations go, whether you view them as monologues or a dialogue or a diatribe. The direction of your sight has an element to this. And so does if you are philosophical and not spiritual, don't believe that any kind of supernatural phenomenon, or if you're adversarial and you might be a Satanist or a Luciferian, something like that, or somebody who's against the demiurge, you might be a Gnostic, or you might be a Christian and frustrated with God. But we tend to in this nihilistic faith principle, this nihilistic faith kind of allegory, but it's a very human allegory that I'm describing. We question, we ask why, and whatever the source of our highest ideal or the source of what we view as this creation or our what created us and these situations, these people, everybody around us in this universe, we tend to direct this questioning towards that. And we ask it, why? And I've tried again and again and again, and I keep on failing. And when it becomes frustration, a lot of time we direct it externally, but a lot of the time we'll also direct it ourselves. And sometimes when we're not, expecting, we'll get to expecting from the universe in a second, but when we're kind of being self-deprecating, we're like, why do I keep on failing? And then eventually at some point, you'll be trying to make a deal with a higher power or a higher ideal, and go from frustration to, and this is a process of denial as well. A lot of this stuff is linked, but ultimately, a lot of it is kind of like cutting yourself, causing self-harm, but philosophically or spiritually, or just reinforcing the adversarial conception, your adversarial conception of the universe, if you go down that route. And it's something that's very core to being human, that frustration. But it is very much self-harm. However, in whatever way you look at it, it is a lot of the time it just hurts to ask these questions, and in this way, and to be in this frustration hurts. And even if we're turning it outward, we're still or even to a higher ideal, we're still kind of turning it inward, and we're hurting ourselves. And we're focusing on this pain, and that pain becomes our entire world. That frustration becomes our entire reality, as we're stuck in this box of this nihilistic faith principle and conflict. We must always understand that this impulse, whatever you want to title it, or whatever reason that it happens, this nihilistic faith impulse, is very much self-harm, and it's cyclical. We're causing ourselves pain with this frustration and coming back to either an external source, philosophical source, or even ourself as the source of this failure, of this pain. But the frustration of the nihilistic faith impulse, and it's something as insane. And I say this as somebody who has done self-harm a lot in the past. It's as insane as that. It is a cutting of oneself. It's a harming of oneself. This nihilistic faith impulse, a self-destruction, impulse to self-destruction, an impulse to not just destruction of one's ideas in the moment, but it can really shift and change somebody in the long term as this self-destruction continues. The frustration, what we have to realize about it is that the universe, God, our higher ideals, they're not going to save us from this impulse. The universe isn't going to respond, and honestly doesn't really care that we're hurting ourselves in this way. And there's a part of us that expects it to care, isn't there? We expect it to matter. And we do it with the supposition, subconsciously some of the time, a lot of the time, that something is listening and something is like, oh, I really messed up, or oh, I'm gonna help you correct your life, or universe is like looking at you, be like, oh, I'm really sorry that you're feeling this way. I'm sorry that all these things have happened. We expect it to be a dialogue with something, even if it's just philosophically with ourselves, and we expect that diatribe against the universe, ourselves, God, our philosophy. We expect there to be a tangible impact. Subconsciously, we do. We expect there to be a tangible impact and a reaction, but we're really just yelling in a room. And I believe in, source, gods, the divine mother, spirits. I believe in the supernatural, but we have to understand that this isn't something, we're not hurting anything else. We're hurting ourselves. This is a self-destructive impulse. The universe doesn't respond to this kind of frustration directed at it. Our inner self doesn't respond to that. Our philosophical ideals don't punish us because of that. We're punishing ourselves the whole time. And nothing will respond to us if we get stuck in this frustration and follow this impulse again and again and again. It's a cycle. It's a cycle that we think that we can break through frustration at something, rather than trying to change, rather than trying to redirect the impulse to change. We think that we feel that the frustration in and of itself is substantiated, will be substantiated because of its intensity. But that is not the case. It won't be. We are yelling at ourselves in an empty room. And the universe, God hears us. But it's not, our individual frustration is not, our internal pain with this is not felt universally. It's not felt externally, no matter what's viewing us. We have to find a solution. We have to change. We are not hurting anybody but ourselves if we get stuck in this cycle that goes again and again and again, and we feed it with frustration. We are only cutting ourselves. We are only harming ourselves. We're not going to get any kind of reaction from God, from the universe. We are in an echo chamber when we're like that. And that's an echo chamber that a lot of us find ourselves in quite often. But it does not bring change. We have to choose to change. We have to choose to try to take effect. And if it's people in the world being hurt, we have to try to help in some way. I wouldn't suggest violence, but nothing is going to change because of our frustration. We have to choose to change it or change ourselves. Changing ourselves is the best way to keep from this cycle, this nihilistic faith impulse. We have to change ourselves. And no matter how frustrated we are, that is the only solution. Thank you very much, and I hope all of you have a wonderful day. And it's important to realize that the nihilistic faith impulse that I'm talking about is not necessarily death drive. A lot of this sounds like death drive, but it's not necessarily drive to self-destruction. It's a drive to, as I've stated previously, it's kind of a drive to be frustrated at external sources of power, or whatever you think created everything, or if you just direct it at the universe in general, if you're not talking about like a god or a creator. Frustration at everything, external frustration, expanding frustration. It's not necessarily wanting to die, it's frustration either with God, with the God spirits, with the universe, with humanity itself. Sometimes it's directed at other human beings. You hear people talk about, oh, humanity, everybody's awful, everybody's just terrible. This is a terrible state of circumstances. Yes, like it often is. You say it is most of the time. And perhaps it's very unfair how everything's organized. If you believe in a higher power, or if you believe that the universe, everything is connected and the universe is doing this to you, perhaps it is unfair. Sometimes, there's a saying in Hinduism where we talk about either everything is fair or everything is unfair. And a lot of things in between, the rest of this is just me. A lot of things in between are like compromises and like trying to like hash it out, but really it's either all fair or all unfair. And whatever you believe, and you don't have to believe that, but whatever you believe, don't direct that frustration outward at the unfairness of whatever has made these circumstances, or the circumstances themselves, or humanity, or the universe, And also, don't direct it within. Don't direct, and it's almost like we are directing it within when we direct it at things that we believe in, and we would direct it even at our higher ideals if we're just philosophical, or we're atheists, we just believe in various ideas. But it's a little bit different than death drive, even if we're directing it within ourselves. Death drive is very much, you want to die. But nihilistic faith impulse is different, and I don't know if I honestly don't know if I'm coming up. I'm not the first one to come upon this idea, and I'm pretty sure I'm not the first one to try to make a term for it. In fact, nihilistic faith impulse might actually be a term. I'm not sure, but I will say that you have to, whatever your circumstances, you have to try to change yourself, and kind of works in tandem. Change your external circumstances. And if you're frustrated at the circumstances that other people are living in, and you feel sorry for other people, you have compassion in your heart, try to change their circumstances, try to help. But this frustration with the nihilistic faith impulse, or even death drive, whether it's self-destruction or frustration, external frustration at something or higher ideals, whatever it is, the directing the frustration, and it's even described in the process of denial, the various phases of denial. But that frustration, I've seen it consume a lot of different people. I've seen it kind of define their spirituality, making it more adversarial, or making it more a cycle of perpetual frustration without kind of a way out. Now, there's ways that this can turn into something that's useful. You can direct that frustration through a different way, and instead of using that frustration, you can still be frustrated. Just don't be frustrated at everything or your high ideals or yourself. Channel that frustration into action, or you can channel that frustration into believing other things, into transforming your ideas and transforming your understanding. A lot of time, both things are necessary. There are ways to use this frustration, but I'll try to say this with as much compassion as possible. And I'll probably take a picture of it, but I have something on the wall over here that says "Don't care for fair." I spray painted this in red and black spray paint on this big piece of paper that says "Don't care for fair." Years and years ago, probably 12 years ago, maybe 11. And, it took me a while to realize that. I didn't realize at the time, but realized it to a certain extent, but you can't expect everything to be fair. And you should assume that everything won't be fair. And that as things exist, that they're not fair. At least emotionally, you should accept that. If you believe in karma or reincarnation like I do, perhaps that's a more logical and more deductive way to think about things. But emotionally, when a lot of this is emotion that we're talking about here, not necessarily hashing out the logic. Don't care for fair. Don't expect things to be fair. Don't feel like they have to be fair. Work on those feelings so that you're not attached to everything being fair, because it's not going to be. And when it is, it should be seen as miraculous or magical. Now, that doesn't mean it's a miracle or it is magic, but it should be miraculous or magical to you. And also, don't fall into depression over this. Don't be like, oh, everything is just so unfair, everything's terrible. Don't fall into that either, because that depression can also lead you to death drive and this repeating cycle of nihilistic faith impulse. It can lead you to both those things. That depression, a lot of times it's good to distract yourself when you're depressed, but that's not the only, like my mom always used to say, that's the only thing that she kind of, advice she knew how to give on that was to just distract yourself when you're depressed. Stop being in your head. And while that is useful some of the time, it is useful. Distract yourself with something productive, a game, reading a good book, drawing, whatever it is. You can distract yourself a number of ways. Try not to distract yourself with like drugs and alcohol, but there's a number of ways to distract yourself. Try to make it a productive distraction. But when you actually have to deal with these things, and you have to deal with these things emotionally, because we're talking about emotion here, we're not just talking about logic. Be able to deal with that depression in a productive way, not just through distraction. Try to find solutions. Sometimes you find solutions in spits and spurts. Sometimes you can only do a certain amount of things during a day, especially if you're very depressed. Sometimes you can't even meet just your responsibilities. You should try to do that, but sometimes there's days when you can't. But don't allow yourself to spiral into depression if your emotions are constantly attached to everything is not fair, so I'm sad about it. There's a part of us that wants the universe to respond to that too, that we're sad, and we're expect like, oh, why doesn't anything care that I'm sad? part of the Nihilistic Faith Impulse again. But try to find solutions bit by bit. Can't do it all at once. Try bit by bit. And you are at an advantage. We are the most intelligent life form on this planet. And if you're watching this, you probably have more privilege than the rest of humanity. I'm not going to say what percentage that you're in, but there's probably, tens and tens of percent below you that have it much worse if you're watching this video right now. You have more information at your disposal. Sometimes it's good to do Google searches, and maybe even ask, these chat AI bots. A lot of them will direct you towards resources. Even Snapchat has an AI where you can be like, what do I do if I'm depressed, or how do I get out of this depression? Just basic Google searches as well, which is kind of what those AIs do. You never know what you'll find. You'll never know what you find in philosophy, in spirituality, in religion. You'll never know what you find when you talk to other people, even if you feel like you're smarter than them or everybody thinks the same. You never know what you're going to find. And if you want to, don't fall into this depression. Don't care for fair. Don't think that the universe has to be fair. But also, don't throw away some of the basic resources that you have at your disposal if you're watching this, probably. There's a whole lot of basic things that you can do. Meditation is also really good. Prayer is really good. But if you just want to meditate and you're just an atheist, and I'm not going to say just, I'm not trying to reduce, like saying just an atheist, like that's not something, but if you're an atheist, you can still meditate. Meditation is huge. Breathing, sit. I have videos on meditation, but just look at ways to meditate. Look up ways that psychiatrists talk about depression. Learn about depression. Figure out how to get out of it. So there's ways to understand this world and not expect things from it, and also not fall into depression. So that kind of concludes this kind of multi-part video about the Nihilistic Faith Impulse I've been talking about. So I feel like I had to give kind of solutions and kind of a wrap up after the last video, the last day that I did it, because I didn't really give a lot of solutions, and I felt like I didn't want to leave you hanging. I hope this helped. I hope this was interesting. Like this video. Feel free to share wherever you like, and feel free to leave a comment if you have any requests for future videos, or if there's things about this that you liked or things that you'd like me to expand on. I'm open to that. At any rate, thank you very much for watching, and I hope all of you have a wonderful day.